Kiev demands apology after cynical quip by TV host. A French satire show host described Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's European tour as a traveling circus. Ukraine's ambassador to France has lashed out at TV network RTL for airing a segment that likened President Vladimir Zelensky's tour of Europe to a traveling circus. Vadim Omolchenko is demanding an apology. The sarcastic characterization was cynical and lacked tact, the diplomat tweeted on Tuesday, adding that the French presenter and show producers had demonstrated neither empathy nor responsibility in airing it. The envoy demanded that RTL apologize to Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. They are fighting for their freedom and for yours, he declared, as well as for their right to live lives that are enjoyable. The episode that the Ukrainian ambassador took issue with was part of a show hosted by comedian and impersonator Laurent Guerra. His shtick is making ridiculous statements in the voice of French public figures, especially politicians. It's not unlike what Zelensky himself did during his career as a comedian, when sketches on his TV show had actors portray Ukrainian political figures in a satirical way. The short gag on RTL took aim not exclusively at the Ukrainian leader but also at many Western politicians, including French President Emmanuel Macron, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and US President Joe Biden. Speaking a la Carnival Barker, Guerra described them all as part of the troupe of the Zelensky circus and urged the audience to attend the night's entertainment. Zelensky visited France and met Macron on Sunday as part of a whirlwind tour of several European nations. He has taken to the road to secure additional military assistance against Russia. The Ukrainian diplomatic corps has been quite vocal in quashing any criticism of the Zelensky government in the West. Andrei Melnik, Kiev's former ambassador to Berlin, served as a vivid example of the approach, often verbally attacking German politicians whose positions he found not supportive enough of his country's cause. In the early months of the conflict with Russia, the diplomat infamously dubbed Chancellor Olaf Scholz an offended liverwurst over the German leader's refusal to visit Kiev. Melnik now serves as deputy foreign minister. This month he lashed out at his successor in the embassy in Berlin for putting too little pressure on the German government. Cuba announces new migration policies as exodus continues. Cuba announced on Tuesday measures that ease restrictions on its citizens living abroad as the country continues to grapple with an unprecedented exodus of migrants to the United States. The Foreign Ministry said passports would be valid for 10 years, instead of 6, for Cubans over 16 years of age, and cut by more than half the costs associated with renewing the travel documents off-island. The ministry also eliminated a requirement that Cubans pay a fee every 2 years, even before their passports expired, to maintain their active status. The new rules take effect on July 1, said Ecobedo Soberan, Director of Consular Affairs for the Cuban Foreign Ministry. He said the measures are focused on the strengthening of ties with the Cuban community abroad. Cuba for decades limited emigration of its citizens, and many Cubans living abroad complain of bureaucratic hurdles and exorbitant fees for maintaining ties and renewing travel documents with their home country. More than 300,000 Cubans arrived at the U.S. border last year, according to U.S. Customs and Border Patrol data, a record-breaking exodus amid an unprecedented economic crisis. The migration off the island has further stressed the country's already near-collapsed economy and weighs heavily on Cuban society, with many families broken and scattered across the globe. China fires back at washed-up Liz Truss over Taiwan speech. Truss has become the most senior British politician to visit Taiwan since former UK PM Margaret Thatcher made the journey to the island in the 1990s. Former UK Prime Minister Liz Truss has urged her successor Rishi Sunak to designate China a threat to her country's national security. In a speech in Taiwan's capital Taipei on Wednesday, Truss called on the British Prime Minister to deliver on language he used during last summer's Conservative Party leadership contest. At the time, he described China as the biggest long-term threat to Britain, while also pledging to close all of Beijing's Confucius Institutes in the UK. He was right, and we need to see those policies enacted urgently. The UK's integrated review needs to be amended to state clearly that China is a threat. Confucius institutes should be closed down immediately. Instead, the service could be provided by organizations with the support of Hong Kong nationals and Taiwanese nationals who have come to the UK on a free basis, the ex-UK PM pointed out. She warned the West against working with China, in her condemnation of totalitarian regimes. We know what happens to the environment or world health under totalitarian regimes that don't tell the truth. You can't believe a word they say, according to Truss. The former British PM claimed that China is undertaking the biggest military build-up in peacetime history and that they have already made their choice about their strategy, adding the only choice we have is, do we appease and accommodate that strategy or do we take action now? On Taiwan, she called for a more coordinated approach so that the island has the defense it needs in the face of China's potential invasion. She added that Western countries need not to engage in further economic dialogue with China while it takes this aggressive stance. The remarks come as Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin told reporters that washed-up British politicians use Taiwan to draw attention to themselves, in an apparent nod to Truss. The statement followed the Chinese embassy branding Truss' visit to Taiwan as a dangerous political show which will do nothing but harm to the UK. This provocative move has caused strong indignation among the Chinese people and will be firmly rejected by people with conscience from all walks of life, the embassy emphasized. According to the Chinese diplomats, by playing the Taiwan card and engaging in political shows, Truss and the like are colluding with the Taiwan independence secessionist forces to provoke confrontation and escalate tensions across the Taiwan Strait. What they did has fully revealed their sinister intentions. Truss visiting Taiwan makes her the most well-known UK politician to travel to the island since former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's trip in the 1990s. The 5-day visit by Sunak's predecessor to Taiwan comes as ties between Beijing and London are at their worst in decades. A new comprehensive review of the UK's security, defence, and foreign policy, in particular, refers to China as a threat to Taiwan. Tensions between mainland China on the one hand, and Taiwan, and countries boosting cooperation with the island on the other hand, escalated after then-US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited the island in early August 2022. Beijing condemned Pelosi's trip, which it regarded as a gesture of support for separatism, and held large-scale military exercises in the vicinity of the island in a retaliation move. Beijing perceives Taiwan, which has been governed indecently since 1949, as an inalienable part of China's sovereign territory and opposes any official contacts between the island and other countries. Taipei insists that it is an autonomous nation but stops short of declaring independence. Beijing opposes any official contacts of foreign states with Taipei and considers Chinese sovereignty over the island indisputable. Is the belief in the U.S. that owning a gun ensures safety a delusion? Gun violence continues to plague the U.S. as communities grapple with the devastating consequences of shootings across the nation. One of the most tragic events recently happened in Allen, Texas, where a gunman bearing Nazi tattoos opened fire at a suburban Dallas shopping mall. 8 people lost their lives, including a 3-year-old child. Every year, 43,000 Americans die from gun violence, according to Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, a U.S. public interest law center and nonprofit organization. Guns are also the leading cause of death among children under 18. From schools and shopping malls to city streets and neighborhoods, no corner seems immune to the menace of gun-related incidents. Mass shootings, in particular, have captured headlines and left scars on the national psyche. There have been 225 mass shootings as of May 15, 2023, data from the Gun Violence Archive shows. Since 2018, the U.S. has experienced an average of over 1 mass shooting a day, and the number shows an upward trend, according to the Giffords Law Center. Behind the increasing gun violence, the U.S. is the most heavily armed civilian population by far in the world. There are more guns than people in the country. According to an estimate by Small Arms Survey, a Geneva-based organization, there are about 393 million privately owned firearms in the U.S., which is higher than the country's population of about 330 million. The extensive ownership of firearms has been closely associated with the upsurge in gun violence, said Du Hua, an associate professor at the School of History at Wuhan University. He said the increase in gun violence can be attributed to the rise in firearm purchases driven by concerns for personal safety. Mass shootings instill fear in the general public, which is often intensified by paranoid conspiracy theories suggesting that the government intends to seize firearms. As a result, people rush to purchase guns, leading to an increase in the availability of weapons and a higher risk of more mass shootings. This pattern can be seen in Texas. Following the Uvalde shooting in May 2022 that killed 19 children and 2 teachers at Robb Elementary School, FBI background checks in Texas surged by 17% in the subsequent month of June. In most developed countries, gun ownership has been traditionally centered on hunting. However, about 2/3 of U.S. gun owners cite protection as a major reason for owning a gun, as revealed by a 2017 survey by the Pew Research Center. When firearms are readily accessible, there is an increased potential for their misuse, whether it is intentional or accidental, said Du. Nevertheless, several reasons stymie better gun control, which is the key to eliminating gun violence. One of them is the influence of gun interest groups in U.S. politics. The National Rifle Association, NRA, remains the most powerful gun lobby in the country. Backed by a substantial budget, it wields significant influence in shaping gun policy. Another reason is political polarization. With the 2 major political parties growing increasingly adversarial, the prospects of finding common ground on important political matters have become challenging. Also, the substantial power held by individual states further complicates forming a unified national gun control policy. Amid the ongoing tragedy of frequent mass shootings, firearms continue to be deeply entrenched in American culture. In the past, firearms were mostly sold to the military. This changed after the Civil War when more people suddenly had experience with guns, and more guns were in circulation, according to Philip Gorski, a sociology professor at Yale University. In the wake of wartime production, gun manufacturers faced a shortage of customers. So they started marketing guns as a means of self-defense, gradually evolving them into a symbol of masculinity. The prevalence of guns in American culture can also be attributed to the rise of the conservative movement, which traces back to the mid-1930s. In recent years, modern American conservatism has evolved beyond a mere social trend of thought, rather, it has become a grassroots mobilization movement, said Du. Conservatives strongly uphold the principle of white supremacy and emphasize the revered status of guns among white individuals. They view them as symbols of individuality and freedom. Many Americans hold their right to bear arms, enshrined in the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, as sacred. Even though the interpretations of this provision vary, it emerges as a significant institutional challenge in gun control, Du explained. Does owning a gun guarantee safety? Despite the persistent arguments from gun rights activists, backed by the NRA's long-standing narrative that a good guy with a gun can stop gun violence, research has consistently shown otherwise. One of the most famous studies includes a 2015 study conducted by the Harvard Injury Control Research Center, which showed that individuals using guns for self-defense accounted for less than 1% of the 14,000 crimes analyzed from 2007 to 2011. The study also found that having a firearm in the house does not necessarily provide effective protection during dangerous situations. On the contrary, it tends to amplify other risks. Individuals who confronted attackers with guns were more prone to getting injured compared to those who called the police or ran away. Another big concern is gun-related suicide. In a study published in 2020 in the New England Journal of Medicine, researchers tracked over 26 million adults living in California for 12 years, monitoring whether they buy handguns and if they died by suicide. They found that those who purchased handguns were over 3 times more likely to die by suicide compared to those who hadn't bought guns. Similarly, women who had purchased handguns were more than 7 times more likely to die by suicide. Easy access to firearms, especially handguns, is a significant risk factor for suicide, the research concluded. As incidents of gun violence continue to rise in frequency, the issue of reconciling gun ownership and safety has drawn a new round of media coverage and sparked public discussion. According to a recent CBS News poll, 3 in 4 Americans believe that mass shootings are preventable if we really tried rather than something they have to accept as part of a free society. And around half of Americans say guns make their country dangerous. Meanwhile, 61% said the political debate over guns makes them feel frustrated, and 45% say they feel angry. Paradoxically, addressing gun violence entails a gradual and challenging process, given that it stems from deeply rooted cultural factors within the country. Majority of Brits have negative view of Sunak, poll. The opposition Labour Party would be voted into government if a general election were held tomorrow, data suggests. Polling data published on Tuesday by market research firm YouGov has found that almost 60% of UK citizens have an unfavourable view of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The results of the YouGov survey, which was conducted on May 14 and 15 and featured 2012 respondents, suggested that just 6% of respondents had what was described as a very favourable opinion of the Conservative Party leader. Another 25% described their stance on Sunak as somewhat favourable, while 59% of respondents had a negative view of Sunak's premiership, the poll found. The latter figure included 34% who described their opinion of the Premier as very unfavourable. Keir Starmer, leader of the opposition Labour Party, marginally outperformed Sunak in key poll metrics, YouGov reported. Of the respondents, 35% said they had a favourable opinion of Starmer compared to 51% who stated the opposite, while 15% didn't offer an opinion either way. YouGov's data reflects similar recent polling which has indicated a swell in support for Labour. Per analysis by Statista this month, 43% of the British public would vote for the Labour Party if a general election were held tomorrow. Just 26% would vote for the Conservatives, who have been the primary governing party in the UK since 2010. The Tories have trailed Labour in most polls since 2022. The turbulent 44-day prime ministership of Liz Truss opened a large gap in support between both parties, Statista noted, as the government struggled to transition away from the scandals which plagued the final weeks of Boris Johnson's leadership. While Tory polling has rebounded somewhat under Sunak, Statista's data suggests that the Conservatives would lose any upcoming general election in the current political climate. British voters have consistently identified the economy as a key issue, according to extended data trends cited by Statista. Public health, as well as the successful operation of the National Health Service, NHS, immigration reform, and the environment are also considered to be the most important issues facing the UK, polling indicates. Biden, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy hopeful on debt ceiling deal. Democratic President Joe Biden and top congressional Republican Kevin McCarthy edged closer to a deal to avoid a looming U.S. debt default Tuesday, as the threat of an economic nightmare prompted Biden to cut short an Asia trip this week. After an hour of talks, McCarthy, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, told reporters the two sides remained far apart on an agreement to lift the debt ceiling. But he said, it is possible to get a deal by the end of the week. It's not that difficult to get to an agreement. Democrats were not as positive about a quick time frame, but the White House called the meetings productive and direct. Biden said the leaders reached an overwhelming consensus. That defaulting on the debt is simply not an option. Our economy would fall into recession. There's still work to do, Biden said at a White House event honoring Jewish Americans, saying the parties were on a path forward to make sure that America does not default on its debt for the first time. Biden said he was disappointed that Republicans will not consider ways to raise revenue. Raising taxes on the wealthy and companies to help pay for programs for other Americans is a key part of Biden's 2024 budget. Biden met for about an hour with McCarthy, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell and House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries after their aides met over the weekend to try to strike a deal. Republicans have refused to vote to lift the debt ceiling past its $31.3 trillion limit unless Biden and his Democrats agree to spending cuts in the federal budget. However, McConnell said after the meeting, "We know we're not going to default. The U.S. government may default on some debts as early as June 1 unless Congress votes to lift the debt ceiling, and economists fear the country will slide into a recession." Ukraine's neighbors ready to pay off Zelensky to stop conflict, Seymour Hersh. EU nations have privately urged the president of the war-torn country to end the fighting, a U.S. official told the veteran journalist. Poland is leading a group of European nations that are secretly urging Vladimir Zelensky to find a way to settle the conflict with Russia, veteran journalist Seymour Hersh has reported, citing a knowledgeable American official. According to U.S. intelligence, other EU countries that want to see an end to the fighting include Hungary, Germany, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, Hersh wrote in an article published on his Substack page on Wednesday. Hungary is a big player in this and so are Poland and Germany, and they are working to get Zelensky to come around, the unnamed official claimed. Those countries have made it clear that Zelensky can keep what he's got if he works up a peace deal, even if he's got to be paid off, if it's the only way to get a deal. By keep what he's got, the source was referring to the Ukrainian president's villa in Italy and interests in an offshore bank, Hersh clarified. However, Zelensky has so far rejected the proposal, while other major European players, France and the UK, are too beholden to the Biden administration, which is continuing to back the Ukrainian leader, the official said. One of the main reasons why Poland and the others want the conflict to end is because the burden of accommodating Ukrainian refugees has become too much for them, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist wrote. The problem for those countries is how to get the U.S. to stop supporting Zelensky, Hersh's source suggested. He claimed that U.S. intelligence is well aware that Ukraine is running out of money and that the next 4 months are critical. And Eastern Europeans are talking about a deal. However, he added that it's not clear to the intelligence community what the president and his foreign policy aides in the White House know of the reality. The U.S. is still training Ukrainians how to fly our F-16s that will be shot down by Russia as soon as they get into the war zone. The mainstream press is dedicated to Biden and the war, and Biden is still talking about the Great Satan in Moscow while the Russian economy is doing great, the official explained. Russia has repeatedly stated that it's ready to resolve the conflict at the negotiating table. However, it did not receive any proposals from Ukraine and its Western backers that it could consider reasonable. Zelensky has been promoting his 10-point peace plan, which calls for Russian forces to withdraw to borders claimed by Ukraine, to pay reparations, and to submit to war crime tribunals. Moscow has rejected the plan as unacceptable, saying it ignores the reality on the ground and is actually a sign of Kiev's unwillingness to solve the crisis through diplomatic means. Equatorial Guinea declares end to COVID-19, Marburg health emergency. Equatorial Guinea said Tuesday it has ended the health emergency of the COVID-19 pandemic and the Marburg virus. The end of the emergency status for both diseases was declared by Nguma Obiang Mangwi, president of the Political Committee for Health Emergency of the Central African country, according to a statement from the Information and Press Office of Equatorial Guinea. He thanked China and other countries for their aid with the purpose of severely combating the threats of COVID-19 and Marburg. The COVID-19 pandemic has killed 187 people since the virus was detected in Equatorial Guinea in March 2020, according to the statement. The country has reported 17 confirmed cases of Marburg virus disease, including 12 deaths, as of May 1, according to the World Health Organization. Ex-French defense minister's phone was hacked, media. Florence Parly is the latest senior official said to have been targeted by Pegasus spyware. Former French defense minister Florence Parly was spied on with the use of Israeli-developed Pegasus surveillance software, Mediapart reported on Tuesday. Traces of the spyware's code are said to have been discovered on her phone. Investigators informed Parly about their discovery last week, according to the outlet. The evidence does not point to a specific party behind the espionage, nor does it indicate when the former minister's device was infected, although a nation-state is presumed to be behind the surveillance. At least 23 public figures in France have been targeted with Pegasus hacks, including President Emmanuel Macron and former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, according to French media. Reports have suggested that the Moroccan government may have used the malware to collect intelligence. Previous investigations identified Parly's predecessor Sébastien Lecornu, former Education Minister Jean-Michel Blanquer, former Territorial Cohesion Minister Jacqueline Gourault, former Agriculture Minister Julien Dinormandie, and former Ecological Transition Minister Emmanuel Worgan as victims of Pegasus snooping. Pegasus is arguably the best-known toolkit on the market, which allows targeted hacks on electronic devices. After infection, the malware provides access to personal data stored on a phone and can turn it into a surveillance device. Developer NSO Group has deployed the product on behalf of governments around the world, and has claimed that the service is intended to combat organized crime and terrorism. However, critics say the malware has been used to spy on journalists, dissidents, and foreign officials on a massive scale. It was reported in 2021 that a list of phone numbers flagged for penetration by NSO clients had over 50,000 entries. The firm was hit with U.S. sanctions that year amid a flurry of exposés of its role in alleged violations of human rights. Does Poland want Zelensky to quit NATO's proxy war, as Seymour Hersh claims? As per Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is privately beginning to lose the support of his neighbors, with a Poland-led group of European states urging him to find a way to end the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Has Warsaw really grown weary of the standoff despite its bellicose anti-Russia rhetoric? Seymour Hersh revealed on May 17 that government officials in Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, Estonia, Czechoslovakia, and Latvia have called upon Volodymyr Zelensky to halt hostilities with Russia, even by resigning himself, if necessary, and begin the process of rebuilding Ukraine. Hersh based this information on unnamed American intelligence community operatives. The European leaders have made it clear that Zelensky can keep what he's got, a villa in Italy and interests in offshore bank accounts, if he works up a peace deal, even if he's got to be paid off, if it's the only way to get a deal, Hersh wrote on Wednesday. A knowledgeable American official told the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist that some in the leadership in Hungary and Poland were among those working together to get Ukraine involved in serious talks with Moscow. Mateusz Piskorski, a political observer and columnist for the MYSL Polska, Polish Thought, newspaper, does not rule out that Hersh's sources are right. Just the other day, and this may indirectly confirm the thesis in Hersh's article, a lobbying group was created to support the transfer of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, Piskorski told Sputnik. The group included the UK and the Netherlands. We have not heard anything about the fact that Poland and other countries of Eastern and Central Europe were going to participate in this group. So this may be an indirect confirmation of the statements of the American journalist. At the same time, Piskorski warned against leaping to conclusions. Poland, as well as the other countries mentioned, with the exception of Hungary, is largely guided by instructions from Washington rather than their national interests, according to him. Poland doesn't benefit from NATO proxy war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, it has already become clear that Poland is by no means benefiting from the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, even though Warsaw has emerged as one of the most ardent supporters of the Kiev regime since February 2022. After the West derailed the Russo-Ukrainian March 2022 peace talks in Istanbul, the standoff escalated, with NATO member states flooding Ukraine with advanced weapons and ammo. Poland is one of the victims of the escalation of this conflict, given the economic problems that Poland is facing now, taking into account, among other things, the Ukrainian migrant problem, Piskorski said. This problem is present and increasingly causes various kinds of conflicts with the local Polish population. So, Poland is definitely not a beneficiary. Even if we count the sums that were spent by Warsaw to support the Kiev authorities in this conflict, I would say that the opposite is true. Even if one takes a look at the Ukrainian grain imports, it was Polish farmers, grain producers who suffered the most as a result of what is happening in Ukraine, as a result of duty-free imports of Ukrainian grain and agricultural products. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, 8,240,289 Ukrainian refugees have been recorded across Europe as of May 16, 2023. Of this number, over 5 million have been under various types of European temporary protection programs, including 1.6 million Ukrainians who have been registered for national protection schemes in Poland. The cost of housing Ukrainians in Europe is considerable, especially amid swirling inflation and the accompanying economic slowdown. Poles emerged to be one of the most generous givers. However, late last year they started to complain that they don't have the resources to sustain the initial scale of hospitality, the existing capacity of the Polish housing market, education system, and other essential services has not been enough to meet the needs of Ukrainian newcomers. It must be clearly understood that they are not refugees from the point of view of international law, but are precisely immigrants by definition, Piskorski emphasized. Firstly, those who arrive from Ukraine have not been subjected to checking, as it is done in the case of refugees. A refugee, in accordance with international law, must prove that his/her life is really in danger, that he/she really is a refugee. While we are watching the ongoing conflict, it can be said that most of the territory of Ukraine is not affected, with the exception, of course, of the frontline zones in the Donbass. In addition, an influx of cheap agricultural products from Ukraine has dealt a heavy blow to Polish farmers. In April, Warsaw was forced to place a temporary ban on the import of grain, oilseeds, and other foods from Ukraine in the wake of growing protests. The restrictions will remain in place until the end of June. It's hardly surprising that the Polish government lent a sympathetic ear to the nation's farmers. In Poland, rural areas account for around 40% of the population, which is one of the highest figures in the European Union. Increasingly, in opinion polls, information appears that the vast majority of Poles still consider the continuation of this conflict at least inappropriate, Piskorski continued. Some even consider it dangerous from the point of view of Poland, as well as attempts to draw Poland into this conflict. According to various opinion polls, a certain understanding of the geopolitical essence of this conflict is also growing. And from the point of view of many Poles, not everything is so clear-cut. Earlier, of course, Russia was blamed for everything. And just 2 months ago, the results of a sociological survey were published, according to which 26% of Poles believe that the US and NATO are the perpetrators of this conflict. Poland's 2023 general elections. To complicate matters further, Poland is bracing for general elections in the autumn of 2023. As the ruling Law and Justice, PiS, party is seeking a third term, it must ensure that the problems and concerns of its constituency are addressed. Do not forget that parliamentary elections will be held in Poland this fall, Piskorski noted. So, most likely, some Polish political forces, including the ruling party, should take into account the public mood, for example, the latest opinion polls which clearly show that the Poles are against the participation of their country in the Russo-Ukrainian armed conflict. In addition, the growing spending on maintenance, support, and social benefits for the citizens of Ukraine is not perceived positively by the majority of Poles as the country is heading to the general elections, according to The Observer. If the influx of Ukrainian immigrants coincided with Poland's economic recovery, it would have a positive effect on the economy as a whole, explained Piskorski. However, unfortunately, Poland is experiencing an economic downturn. Associated, of course, with sanctions, with the suicidal policy of Europe in recent months. With such an economic downturn, I think that Poland really does not have the resources to support a certain number of immigrants from Ukraine, the Polish Observer remarked. This understanding occurs during the election campaign. Just a few days ago, the Polish government promised to increase regular social benefits for Polish citizens, for example, an increase in benefits for Polish families. But for this the government needs to find the means. So, Of course, in order to really increase these benefits before the elections, they need to somehow reduce spending in other sectors. Well, we can assume that one of the options for saving will be, perhaps, not a complete cessation, but a decrease in the level of financial support for Ukrainian citizens. Dissent growing in Washington. While the U.S. intelligence community is seeing ongoing changes in the perception of the conflict in some European capitals, the White House is continuing to push ahead with its proxy war in Ukraine, as per Hersh. The journalist quoted an unnamed American official as saying that Europe's problem is that the White House wants Zelensky to survive while there are others, in Russia and in some European capitals, who say Zelensky has got to go. No matter what. According to Hersh, it's not clear that this understanding has gotten to the Oval Office. There are various groups in the White House and it's quite probable that some are seeking at least temporary de-escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian standoff, according to Piskorsky. There are hawks, and there are those who are in favor of at least a temporary de-escalation of this conflict, he said. Of course, we may assume that there are various conflicts and behind-the-scenes games in Washington. So, even if we take into account that Poland and other countries in the region are not independent players, it is possible that they may have received some advice or instructions from those political circles in Washington that prefer to freeze, for example, this conflict on for some time. Meanwhile, as long as Warsaw acts according to instructions from Washington, Poland remains hostage to U.S. political games. Mystic tremors in Baltic Sea linked to fighter jets breaking sound barrier. The so-called sonic boom is a sound associated with shock waves created by objects traveling through the air faster than the speed of sound. To the human ear, it sounds similar to an explosion or a loud thunderclap. The same mysterious tremors and low-frequency sounds that were observed on the Danish island of Bornholm and puzzled locals and researchers alike were also recorded in Blekinge County and the Baltic island of Åland in southern Sweden. Seismologist Bjorn Lund, an associate professor at the University of Uppsala, cited reports of low-frequency sounds and tremors by locals, to the point of windows shaking. Last weekend, the phenomenon was said to last between 10 and 13 seconds. The Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland, GEUS, ascribed the tremors to pressure waves from an unknown source in the atmosphere, adding more suspense to the story. However, Lund pointed out that the same phenomenon has been measured several times a year in Sweden, including the Stockholm archipelago, and the tremors were found to be caused by fighter jets breaking the sonic barrier. A sonic boom is a sound associated with shock waves created by objects traveling through the air faster than the speed of sound. A sonic boom generates an enormous amount of sound energy and sounds similar to an explosion or a thunderclap to the human ear. These are very much the same phenomena that we see here a few times a year. So for me it is the most proximate reason, Lund told Danish media. According to Lund, the sonic boom may have appeared louder due to the phenomenon of inversion, where a different set of temperatures in layers of air above the earth affects the spread of sound. However, neither the Danish nor the Swedish military could confirm they had fighter jets on their wings on Saturday, the day the phenomena occurred last. Nor did the Swedish arms manufacturer Saab, the usual culprit in previous observations in Sweden, according to Lund, admit to performing test flights on Saturday. However, Polish authorities had previously disclosed intense military activity during the Anaconda 23 drill in the northern part of the country, which involved a fighter jet and the live firing of artillery munitions. Bornholm, population 40,000, is a rocky island in the Baltic Sea, south of Sweden, northeast of Germany, and north of Poland. It lies notably close to where the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 gas pipelines were sabotaged in September 2022. Authorities in the relevant countries are still investigating the bombings. A subsequent bombshell investigation by veteran journalist Seymour Hersh suggested the involvement of the US and Norway in the pipeline attacks. This has since been repeatedly rejected by the Biden administration. Western media outlets have instead hinted at a potential pro-Ukrainian group's role in the bombings. Moscow considers the explosions at the two pipelines an act of international terrorism and will continue to use any available legal mechanisms to bring those responsible to justice, Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev said.